There's no denying that Harbor's had a rough go of it lately. He had the lowest pick rate and win rate in Ranked. He also had one of the lowest pick rates in the VCT, only appearing when teams were playing on Icebox and Abyss, at least in the Americas. It seems like he just wasn't the kind of controller that people wanted, so something had to be done. That's why Riot reworked Harbor in patch 11.10, completely changing his abilities, and in turn, changing the way he's played. But did they actually fix him? Or did they just put a fresh coat of paint on a sinking ship? That's why we wanted to grab our scuba gear and do a deep dive on Harbor, to really get to the bottom of why he needed a rework, what the rework actually changed, and see if he's now a dreamboat or still a shipwreck. Harbor was released back in October 2022. He was the 10th new agent added to Valorant, and the second new controller, the first being Astra. What made Harbor unique was that all his standard abilities were essentially smokes. His first ability was High Tide, a giant wall you shoot out of your hand that you can curve around to cut up the map. The next ability is Cove, essentially a Viper Orb that has a small amount of armor that the enemy team needs to break if they want to spam through it. This was great for planning the spike or getting ninja defuses, since the armor bought you an extra few seconds of safety. Harbor's last standard ability was Cascade, essentially an ISO wall that you control where it stops, and slows anyone who touches it, enemies and teammates alike. Finally, his ultimate ability, Reckoning, was the only non-vision blocking ability in his kit. This ability made a giant circle on the map that would stun enemy agents if they stood still in it for too long, making it absolutely perfect for executing onto bomb sites. So, looking at all these abilities, let's try and figure out what Harbor's identity was before the rework.
I think Harbor before the rework was an interesting niche pick. He had pretty good reasons to be picked on a few different maps, and that depended on the map. But I think that no matter when you picked him, you were shoehorned into playing in one way, and he wasn't very flexible, especially on defense. Harbor can be used in a few different ways on attack, but on defense, he pretty much did one thing pre-rework, which was just play to flood retake. The thing Harbor is best at is you want to retake a site, and it's not a set retake. It's not like you're sitting outside Haven A going, okay, everyone ready, got all your lineups. But instead, you're flooding into the site as people are execing. A good example of this would be looking at NRG's Abyss and looking at their B holds. They're not trying really to hold B, but they're also not set retaking it. As the attacking team is entering, Harbor's rotating in, throwing his High Tide, and everyone's just kind of flooding in at the same time together, trying to stop the hit as it's entering the site.
So that clears up Harbor's identity as an agent before the rework. But why was Harbor such a staple on maps like Icebox, Abyss, and Pearl?
Yeah, old Harbor on Icebox, it's a great example of him at his happiest. The Cascade got a lot of value on attack. You could really easily work B main and deal with op angles. On A, you could really easily win the front A main space on attack. It's also a big wide open map, so having the High Tide that covers a lot of different angles, sort of like a Viper wall, helps quite a bit. And then on defense, again, the name of the game a lot of the time is kind of flooding into A. People play post plants from off a lot, so you get the Cove value there. He really, every strength of his, I think, came alive on Icebox. On Abyss, it's a map where it's just hard to defend everything at once. You can't really play a normal defense. So when you have this sort of initiator type controller on defense where you aren't really stalling space, but you're good at those retakes, he fits well for that. And then old Pearl was an example of Harbor where the Cove was a really big reason. The Cascade was good on B long, but the Phantom was really overpowered. Playing and just spamming from offsite was really strong. And Harbor let people kind of cut B site in half, use the Cove to just zerg the plant down. And obviously the inverse is true too. When you're diffusing against that, trying to fight against people playing from offsite, the Cove being able to protect you while you diffuse was a big part of that game.
On paper, or at the pro level, yeah, I can see Harbor being a viable pick on specific maps, hence why you saw him on Icebox and Abyss. But when put into practice, it's a different story. First off, outside of pro play, there's no way you're getting that level of coordination with your teammates. We've all played ranked. We know what kind of animals you get thrown into games with. You're lucky if your teammates have a mic, much less use it for actual callouts, rather than cursing like a pirate. Combine that with the fact that his kit is pure support, so that he has no real solo carry potential, and you see why his rank pick and win rates were so low. But the real issue with Harbor was that there are just so many better options to pick from. You're never going to pick Harbor as a solo controller, since his abilities really only lend themselves to executing or retaking. Your only rechargeable ability is High Tide, and that's not really the kind of thing you want to use when taking map control at the start of a round, since it really telegraphs where you are and where you're going. I'd much rather have an Astra or Omen, where you have enough smokes to take early map control and still have some for the execute. So, if you're taking Astra or Omen as your main controller, why would you take Harbor over somebody like Viper or Brimstone? Both Viper and Brimstone have similar, if not better, smokes than Harbor, plus the added utility of mollies and better ults. So you see, the real issue with Harbor is that he just wasn't better than any of the other controllers, except in niche situations. Which brings us to November 2025, when Harbor got a complete makeover. He's now got 3 new abilities and a fresh playstyle to go with them. First up, you have Storm Surge, a grenade that will nearsight and slow players. Then you have Cove, which now acts like an Omen smoke that you can choose to apply the armor shell to, giving it slightly more flexibility. Also, it refreshes like an Omen smoke, but you still only have one of them. High Tide is back and largely the same, except now it doesn't recharge. Lastly, you have his new ult, Reckoning, which is essentially a fade or breach ult that nearsights and slows. It's essentially just a mix of his new ability Storm Surge and his old ability Cascade, if you made it huge.
One other strength about the pre-rework Harbor was the Cascade. It's an ability that can feel really awkward in kind of on-the-fly situations and on a lot of maps. Probably felt pretty uncomfortable for people in ranked, would be my guess. But in set, team environments, there were examples like Abyss mid or Icebox A and B on attack. These are areas where throwing the Cascade, the push wall, really opens up how you default the map, and it felt great. But it was kind of an awkward ability on defense, and it was pretty inflexible on a lot of maps. So now, after the rework, I think he has a little more diversity. On those kind of scrappy retake situations, he has the Storm Surge now. It's just an extra tool to fight, to clear out an angle. And it's also a bit of a stall piece on defense. So maybe you're playing him with an Astra or something, or with a Vise. Now you have some extra kind of support, and you can throw down your stall, try to blind them in the choke. So he can be played a little more normally, and I think he probably feels more fluid for people in ranked. I don't know if post-rework Harbor will get picked more in VCT or not, but what I would bet is that he's picked more often on maps he wasn't previously played on. My guess would be that Harbor isn't super oppressive on 1 or 2 maps and unpickable on 5 maps. Now it's kind of more evened out. He can be picked on a lot of different maps, you can try different ideas on different maps, and he will fit in decently well. And I also think that, especially for ranked, he's just going to be much more fun to pick up and play without a structured team environment.
Personally, I'm torn. I think Harbor now has the tools to be viable in ranked games, since he's not all execution smokes. Storm Surge gives Harbor the ability to actually stall out a push on defense, and a piece of utility that you can use when attacking a site that isn't a smoke. That said, it seems like Riot just made Harbor the Temu Omen. I'd take Paranoia over Storm Surge any day, since Paranoia goes through walls, which allows you to set up trap plays and get creative with it. Cove is just a slightly better Omen smoke because of the armor, but you only have one. Maybe I'm weird, but I'd rather have 2 Omen smokes than one that blocks a little damage. I'd also gladly take Omen's TP over High Tide, since the TP gives you the freedom to make plays and get out of sticky situations. Sure, High Tide is a great way to cut line of sight, but you still have the issue of it slowing anybody who touches it. So if you use it to block off a site, you're kinda confined to the area you blocked off. You can't push through it and take more space without risking getting punished. And then his ultimate, Reckoning, is just a bigger cascade that blinds and slows. I honestly think the old Reckoning is way better, since it was a constant disruption on the spike site that the enemy had to deal with. Also, the old Reckoning just seemed to fit Harbor's thesis as an agent better. It really helps cement the identity of the Flood controller. The new ult is just a one-time disruption, so if you dodge it, you're fine. Or even if you get hit by it, just stay in cover for a few seconds and then you'll be back in the fight. Ultimately, I think the real issue is that Harbor doesn't have an identity now. But what do I know? I'm just a rank grinder. We'll have to see what the pros cook up in the offseason to see if this new Harbor will sink or swim.